The manila envelope sat on my desk like a ticking bomb. Inside were divorce papers, meticulously prepared by my attorney over the past 3 weeks. All they needed was my signature, and 7 years of marriage to Rebecca would officially begin its end. I stared at the envelope, my hand trembling as I reached for my pen. This should have been easy. After months of distance, cold silences, and mounting suspicions, this should have felt like relief. Instead, my chest felt heavy, like someone had placed a stone directly over my heart. The signs had been everywhere. Rebecca coming home late from work, sometimes past midnight. Her phone constantly buzzing with messages she'd quickly dismiss. The way she'd started dressing differently, more carefully, more intentionally. New perfume. Mysterious appointments on weekends. And worst of all, the emotional distance that had grown between us like a chasm neither of us seemed willing or able to cross. I remembered the woman I'd married. Rebecca had been vibrant, warm, full of laughter that could light up any room. We'd met at a mutual friend's wedding, both of us cynical about the institution of marriage itself, joking about how we'd never fall into that trap. Yet 6 months later, I was down on one knee in Central Park, my carefully planned speech forgotten as I simply asked her to be my wife. She'd said yes before I could finish the question. But that Rebecca felt like a ghost now. The woman who lived in our apartment was a stranger wearing my wife's face. She moved through our home like a shadow, present but not really there. Our conversations had devolved into logistics, bills to pay, groceries to buy, whose turn it was to take out the trash. The intimacy we'd once shared, both physical and emotional, had evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. I'd tried to reach her. God knows I'd tried. Romantic dinners she'd cancel at the last minute. Weekend getaways she'd make excuses to avoid. Couples therapy she'd refused, claiming we didn't need strangers involved in our marriage. Each rejection felt like another nail in the coffin of our relationship. The final straw had come 2 weeks ago. I'd come home early from a business trip, planning to surprise her. The apartment was dark, and she wasn't there. I'd waited, watching the hours tick by, 9 o'clock, 10, 11, midnight. She'd finally walked in at 1:30 a.m., her eyes widening when she saw me sitting in the living room. "Where were you?" I'd asked, my voice eerily calm despite the rage and hurt coursing through my veins. "Work dinner ran late," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. "I texted you." But she hadn't. I'd checked my phone obsessively all night. That lie, so casual and easily delivered, had broken something fundamental in me. If she could lie that easily about something so simple, what else had she been lying about? The next day, I'd called a divorce attorney. Now, sitting in my home office on a Friday evening, I picked up the pen. Rebecca was out again, another one of her mysterious appointments. The apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic from the street below. This was it. The moment I'd been building toward for months. I uncapped the pen and pulled the papers from the envelope, spreading them across the desk. My name was already typed on the signature line, just waiting for my mark. I pressed the pen tip to the paper. That's when I heard the front door open. My heart lurched. She wasn't supposed to be back for hours. I heard her voice, muffled but distinct, and then another voice, female, familiar. Her best friend, Sarah. They must have come back to the apartment to talk. I should have announced my presence. I should have walked out of my office and said hello. Instead, something kept me frozen in my chair as their voices grew clearer. They were in the living room, just on the other side of my office door, which I'd left slightly ajar. "I can't keep doing this," Rebecca said, and something in her voice, a raw vulnerability I hadn't heard in months, made me hold my breath and listen. "How much longer can you hide it from him?" Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Mark deserves to know the truth, Rebecca." I pressed myself against the wall beside the door, my heart hammering so hard I was sure they could hear it. This was it, the confirmation I'd been dreading. She was having an affair, and she'd been confiding in Sarah about it. My hand clenched into a fist, nails digging into my palm. "I know," Rebecca's voice cracked. "I know he deserves the truth. But every time I try to tell him, I can't get the words out. I see his face, and I remember how happy we used to be, and I think about how this will destroy everything. My vision blurred with anger. How dare she talk about destroying everything when she'd been the one destroying our marriage? When she'd been the one sneaking around, lying, disappearing for hours. "Becca, honey, you're dying," Sarah said bluntly. "You can't keep pretending everything is fine. The treatments are getting harder, and he's going to notice eventually. Better he hears it from you than figures it out on his own." The world stopped spinning. Dying? Treatments? My hand flew to my mouth, stifling the gasp that threatened to escape. I must have misheard. I must have. "Stage 3, Rebecca whispered, and I heard her voice break completely. "Dr. Morrison says if the current treatment protocol doesn't work, we're looking at stage 4 within 6 months. And we both know what that means." The papers on my desk might as well have been written in a foreign language now. Nothing made sense. Rebecca was sick. How could she be sick? When had this happened? "Why haven't you told Mark?" Sarah asked, and I could hear the frustration mixed with compassion in her voice. "This isn't something you should be going through alone." "Because he'll blame himself," Rebecca said, and I heard her moving around the living room, probably pacing the way she always did when she was upset. "When I first got the diagnosis, right after our 6th anniversary, remember? I'd been feeling exhausted, having those weird pains. Mark kept insisting I see a doctor, and I kept putting it off. I told him I was fine, that it was just stress from work." I did remember. She'd been dismissing her symptoms for months, and I'd grown increasingly worried. Finally, she'd agreed to see a doctor, but she'd gone alone, insisting it was unnecessary for me to take time off work for a simple checkup. "By the time I finally went," Rebecca continued, her voice thick with unshed tears, "it had already progressed. Dr. Morrison said if I'd come in 6 months earlier, it might have been stage 1, easily treatable. But I waited too long, and now every day feels like borrowed time." The weight of her words crashed over me like a tsunami. All those late nights, they hadn't been affairs. They'd been treatments. Chemotherapy. Radiation. The appointments on weekends, the exhaustion, the distance she'd put between us. It hadn't been about falling out of love. It had been about protecting me from the truth. "He's going to find out," Sarah said softly. "And when he does, he's going to be devastated that you went through this alone." "I know," Rebecca sobbed, and the sound shattered what was left of my composure. "I see him looking at me with suspicion in his eyes, and I know what he's thinking. I know he thinks I'm having an affair or that I've stopped loving him. And maybe that would be easier." Easier? Sarah sounded incredulous. "If he hated me, if he thought I'd betrayed him, then when I'm gone, he wouldn't hurt as much. He could be angry instead of devastated. He could move on faster. He could." "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Sarah interrupted. "Rebecca, that man loves you more than anything in this world. You're not protecting him by lying. You're stealing his choice to support you through this." Through the crack in the door, I could see Rebecca sink onto our couch, her face in her hands. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile than I'd ever seen her. How had I not noticed? How had I been so blind? "I can't watch him watch me die," Rebecca whispered. "I can't be the person who destroys his future, who fills his life with hospital rooms and medical bills and grief. He deserves better than that. He deserves the Rebecca he married, not this broken version." "You're not broken," Sarah said fiercely, sitting beside her and pulling her into a hug. "You're fighting. And you shouldn't have to fight alone." "The treatments are failing," Rebecca said, her voice muffled against Sarah's shoulder. "Dr. Morrison told me yesterday. The tumors aren't shrinking anymore. They're growing. She wants to try a more aggressive protocol, but the side effects. Sarah, I'm so scared." My legs gave out, and I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor of my office, my hand still pressed against my mouth. All this time I'd been preparing to leave her when she'd been fighting for her life. When she'd been terrified and alone, facing her mortality without the one person who'd vowed to stand beside her in sickness and in health. I was the worst husband in the world. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of my office, listening to my wife's broken sobs through the crack in the door. Time seemed to have lost all meaning. The divorce papers on my desk mocked me, evidence of how catastrophically wrong I'd been about everything. "I wrote him a letter," Rebecca said after a long moment of silence. "For after. Sarah, I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Sarah replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "When it's over, when I'm gone, I need you to give it to him. I've explained everything, why I didn't tell him, what I was thinking, how much I loved him even when I was pushing him away. I need him to know that none of this was his fault." "You can tell him yourself," Sarah insisted. "You can tell him today, right now. Come on, let's call him. Where is he tonight?" My breath caught. I should stand up. I should walk out there and tell them I'd heard everything. But I felt paralyzed, as if my body had forgotten how to move. "He said he was working late," Rebecca answered. "But honestly, I think he's avoiding me. I can't blame him. I've been so distant lately. The treatments make me so exhausted, and the medications mess with my emotions. Some days I can barely get out of bed, and I've been taking all these sick days from work. Thank God my boss has been understanding about it." The late nights. They suddenly made perfect sense. She'd been timing her return to avoid me seeing her when she was at her worst, exhausted from chemotherapy, possibly sick from the medications. All those times she'd come home late and gone straight to bed without speaking to me. I'd thought she was avoiding intimacy. In reality, she'd probably been barely able to stay on her feet. And the financial situation? Sarah asked carefully. Rebecca laughed bitterly. "A nightmare. The insurance doesn't cover everything. I've been using my savings, money from my grandmother's inheritance that I'd been keeping separate. I didn't want Mark to see the medical bills and figure it out. But that money's almost gone, and the next round of treatments. Sarah, I don't know how I'm going to pay for them without him noticing." I thought about our finances, how I'd been managing our joint accounts while assuming Rebecca was handling her personal account on her own. She'd been draining her resources to pay for cancer treatment, suffering in silence, trying to protect me from the burden of her illness. The weight of my mistakes crushed down on me. Every suspicious thought I'd had, every cold shoulder I'd given her, every moment of resentment, they all felt like betrayals now. While she'd been fighting the biggest battle of her life, I'd been preparing to abandon her. "You need to tell him," Sarah said again. "Tonight. No more excuses. Mark loves you, and he deserves to be part of this. It's not fair to either of you to keep living this lie. What if he leaves anyway?" Rebecca's voice was so small, so vulnerable. What if he decides that being with a dying woman isn't what he signed up for? What if I tell him the truth, and he looks at me differently, not with love, but with pity? I couldn't bear that, Sarah. I'd rather he think I stopped loving him than see that look in his eyes. That broke me. The idea that she thought I could ever look at her with anything but love, that she believed I would abandon her in her darkest hour, it shattered something fundamental inside me. I had to tell her. I had to make her understand. But before I could move, Sarah spoke again, her tone sharp and angry. "Listen to me, Rebecca Chen. I've known you since college, and I've watched you become one of the strongest, most capable women I know. But this is cowardice. Not telling Mark about your cancer isn't protecting him, it's protecting yourself from having to be vulnerable. And in the process, you're robbing him of the chance to be the husband he promised to be." "You don't understand," Rebecca protested weakly. "I understand perfectly. You're scared. You're scared of dying, scared of suffering, scared of being a burden. But love isn't about protecting each other from hard truths. It's about facing those truths together. And right now, you're facing this alone because you're too afraid to trust that Mark's love is strong enough to handle this." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear my own heart pounding in my ears, could feel tears streaming down my face. Sarah was right. Rebecca was right to be scared, but she was wrong about me. She was wrong about us. "He's been different lately," Rebecca finally said. "Distant. Cold. Sometimes I catch him looking at me with this expression I can't quite read. Part of me wonders if he already knows somehow, if he's figured it out and is just waiting for me to admit it. Or worse, what if he's pulling away because he can sense something is wrong, and subconsciously, he's already preparing to leave? If she only knew. If she only knew that I'd been pulling away because I thought she was pulling away first. We'd been caught in a terrible cycle of misunderstanding, each of us protecting ourselves, neither of us communicating. And it had nearly destroyed us. Tomorrow, Rebecca said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. I'll tell him tomorrow. I'll sit him down and explain everything, the diagnosis, the treatments, the prognosis. All of it. No more secrets. No more lies. Tomorrow, I'll be brave. Why not tonight? Sarah pressed. Because I need one more night. One more night where he looks at me and sees his wife, not a patient. One more night where our marriage isn't defined by my illness. Can you understand that? Just one more night of normal before everything changes. I understood. God help me. I understood completely. But she couldn't have that night, not because I wouldn't give it to her, but because I'd already taken it away with my suspicions and my divorce papers. I heard them moving around, Sarah probably getting ready to leave. I knew I had minutes at most before Rebecca would come looking for me or head to our bedroom. I had to make a choice. I could pretend I hadn't heard anything, give her the night she wanted, and wait for her to tell me on her own terms. Or I could step out right now and reveal that I'd been listening. Neither option felt right. Both felt like betrayals in different ways. But as I heard Sarah gathering her things and Rebecca walking her to the door, I realized that staying hidden was just another form of the dishonesty that had been poisoning our marriage. No more secrets. No more lies. Even if the truth was uncomfortable, even if I'd learned it by accident, I had to face her with it. I stood up on shaking legs, my body feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The divorce papers were still scattered across my desk, obscene in their irrelevance now. I looked at them one more time, these documents that would have destroyed both our lives, and I understood something profound. Love isn't just about the good times. It's about showing up for the worst times too. And I had almost failed that test spectacularly. I heard the front door close as Sarah left. Rebecca's footsteps moved through the apartment, heading toward our bedroom. It was now or never. I opened my office door. Rebecca was halfway down the hallway when she heard the sound. She turned, her eyes widening when she saw me emerge from my office. In the soft light of the hallway, I could see what I'd been too blind, or too unwilling, to notice before. She looked thinner, more drawn. There were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could fully conceal. Her hair, always so lustrous and full, seemed somehow less vibrant. The signs had been there all along, and I'd mistaken them for evidence of an affair rather than evidence of illness. "Mark," she said, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "I didn't know you were home. I thought you were working late." "I got home about an hour ago," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I was in my office." Her eyes flickered to the open door behind me, then back to my face. I watched as understanding began to dawn on her features, watched as the color drained from her cheeks. She knew. She knew I'd heard. "How much did you hear?" she asked, her voice trembling. "All of it," I said, and I watched her face crumble. "Rebecca, why didn't you tell me?" She laughed, a broken, desperate sound that had nothing to do with humor. "When was I supposed to tell you? When you started staying late at work every night? When you stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings? When you started looking at me like I was a stranger?" Her words hit me like physical blows. "I thought you were having an affair," I admitted, my voice breaking. "All the late nights, the secrecy, the distance between us, I thought you were leaving me for someone else." Rebecca stared at me for a long moment, and then, impossibly, she started to laugh. Really laugh. It started as a small chuckle but grew into something almost hysterical, tears streaming down her face. "An affair? You thought I was having an affair? Mark, I can barely make it through a full day without needing a nap. I can't remember the last time I felt truly hungry because the medications make everything taste like metal. Half the time I'm too nauseated to eat dinner, and the other half I'm too exhausted to stay awake past 8 o'clock. When exactly did you think I had the energy for an affair?" Put that way, it sounded absurd. But at the time, Consumed by suspicion and hurt, it had seemed like the only logical explanation. "I'm sorry," I said, the words pathetically inadequate. "God, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I should have talked to you. I should have asked what was wrong instead of assuming the worst. And I should have told you the truth," she replied, her laughter dying as quickly as it had come. "I shouldn't have shut you out. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away. I'm sorry too." We stood there in the hallway, 10 feet apart, a chasm of miscommunication and fear between us. I wanted to close that distance, to pull her into my arms and never let go, but something in her posture, defensive, braced for rejection, kept me frozen in place. "Stage 3, I said softly. "What kind?" She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they were filled with tears. "Ovarian. It's aggressive. I've been doing chemotherapy for 6 months now, along with some targeted drug therapies. They thought they were working at first. The tumors were shrinking, but the latest scan showed they've started growing again." 6 months. She'd been battling this for 6 months, and I'd had no idea. I'd been so consumed with my own hurt feelings and suspicions that I'd been completely blind to what was actually happening to the person I loved most in the world. "What's the prognosis?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Dr. Morrison wants to try a more aggressive treatment protocol. But Mark, the success rate is low, and the side effects are severe. And even if it works, there's no guarantee the cancer won't come back. We're talking about maybe buying some time, not about a cure." The clinical way she delivered this information, her own potential death sentence, broke something in me. I closed the distance between us in 3 quick strides and pulled her into my arms. She stiffened at first, surprised, but then she melted against me, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm so sorry," she kept saying, over and over. "I'm so sorry I didn't tell you. I'm sorry I'm sick. I'm sorry I'm ruining everything." "Stop," I said firmly, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes. "Stop apologizing for being sick. This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault. And you're not ruining anything. You hear me? You're not ruining anything. But the medical bills, the treatments, the time I'll miss from work." "I don't care," I interrupted. "I don't care about the money or the bills or any of that. We'll figure it out. We'll take out loans, we'll sell things, we'll do whatever we have to do. But Rebecca, please don't shut me out of this. Don't make me watch from the sidelines while you fight this battle alone." She looked up at me, searching my face for something. Doubt, resentment, pity, I wasn't sure. "You really mean that," she said, and it wasn't a question. "I mean it more than I've ever meant anything in my life," I replied. We stayed in that hallway for what felt like hours, holding each other, crying together. Years of unspoken fears and miscommunication seemed to pour out of us, washing away the distance that had grown between us. When we finally pulled apart, we moved to the living room couch, and Rebecca began to tell me everything. She walked me through the past year in detail, how she'd first noticed the symptoms but dismissed them as stress. How the pain had grown worse until she could no longer ignore it. The terrifying moment when Dr. Morrison delivered the diagnosis, and Rebecca had sat alone in that sterile office, her entire world crumbling around her. The decision to undergo treatment immediately, and the calculated choice to hide it from me. "I told myself I was being noble," she said, her fingers intertwined with mine. "That I was sparing you the pain and worry. But the truth is, I was being selfish. I was so scared of how you might react, scared of becoming a burden, scared of seeing the light go out in your eyes when you looked at me. So I convinced myself that keeping you in the dark was the right thing to do. And I convinced myself that your distance meant you'd stopped loving me," I replied. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" She laughed softly. "A disaster of a pair, maybe. But we're our disaster." I pulled out my phone and showed her the contact information for the divorce attorney I'd consulted. Her eyes widened as she read the name. "You were really going to leave me," she said, her voice hollow. "I was," I admitted. "I had the papers in my office. I was about to sign them when you came home with Sarah." I paused, then added, I'm going to call him first thing Monday morning and tell him we won't be needing his services. And I'm going to take that as the single biggest bullet I've ever dodged in my life. Because you found out I was sick instead of having an affair? She asked quietly. No, I said firmly. Because I almost gave up on us without fighting for our marriage. Because I almost walked away from the most important person in my world. Your illness isn't why I'm staying, Rebecca. I'm staying because I love you. I'm staying because 7 years ago, I made a promise to stand by you in sickness and in health, and I should have been doing that all along. I'm staying because there's nowhere else I'd rather be than right here, beside you, whatever comes next. Tears streamed down her face again, but this time they seemed different, less anguished, more cathartic. I'm so scared, Mark. I'm terrified of the treatments not working. I'm terrified of leaving you alone. I'm terrified of what the next few months might look like. I know, I said, pulling her close. I'm scared too. But we're going to face this together. No more secrets. No more hiding. From now on, we deal with everything as a team. That's what marriage is supposed to be. We spent the rest of that night talking about everything we should have discussed months ago. She showed me her medical files, explained the treatment protocols, introduced me to the reality of her daily life with cancer. I told her about the suspicions that had been eating away at me, the loneliness I'd felt, the pain of watching our marriage dissolve without understanding why. By the time dawn broke, we were exhausted but somehow lighter. The secrets that had been weighing us down were gone, replaced by a hard truth that we could at least face together. The next week, I accompanied Rebecca to her appointment with Dr. Morrison. The oncologist was a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who greeted me with a firm handshake and an appraising look. So you're Mark, she said. Rebecca has told me a lot about you. Though apparently not as much as I thought she had. Rebecca had the grace to look embarrassed. I told him everything. We're a team now. Good, Dr. Morrison said bluntly. Because what comes next isn't going to be easy, and she'll need support. She walked us through the new treatment protocol, more aggressive chemotherapy, potentially surgery, and experimental drug therapies that might or might not help. The side effects would be severe. The success rate was far from guaranteed. But it was a chance, and we were going to take it. The following months were the hardest of our lives. Rebecca's hair fell out from the chemotherapy, and I held her while she cried as she looked at herself in the mirror. The medications made her violently ill, and I learned to keep a schedule of anti-nausea drugs and gentle foods that she might be able to keep down. There were terrifying midnight trips to the emergency room and endless days in hospital waiting rooms. But there were good moments too. We started a tradition of couch dates, nights where we'd curl up together with blankets and old movies, finding joy in simple proximity. I learned to give her the injections she needed, my hand steady even when my heart was breaking. She taught me which headscarves looked best on her, turning her baldness into a fashion statement. We laughed together, cried together, fought and made up and fell in love all over again. The financial burden was crushing. The medical bills piled up faster than we could pay them, even with insurance. I took on extra consulting work, working from home so I could still be there when Rebecca needed me. We sold my car and made do with one. We moved to a smaller apartment. Friends and family rallied around us, organizing fundraisers and helping however they could. 6 months after that night in the hallway, we sat in Dr. Morrison's office, waiting for the results of Rebecca's latest scan. My hand was clasped so tightly around Rebecca's that my fingers were numb, but I didn't let go. Dr. Morrison walked in with a smile on her face, the first genuine smile we'd seen from her in months. The tumors are shrinking, she said without preamble. Significantly. Whatever this new protocol is doing, it's working. Rebecca, you're responding to treatment. The sound that came out of Rebecca was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I pulled her into my arms, my own eyes burning with tears. We weren't out of the woods yet. Dr. Morrison was quick to caution us that Rebecca would need continued treatment and monitoring, that there were no guarantees. But it was hope. Real, tangible hope. That night, lying in bed together, Rebecca turned to me in the darkness. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd signed those divorce papers? Every day, I admitted. And every day I'm grateful I didn't. I am too, she whispered. Mark, I need you to promise me something. No matter what happens, if the treatment keeps working or if it stops working, I need you to promise that we'll keep talking. Keep being honest with each other. Keep choosing us. I promise, I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. Through everything that comes, good or bad, we face it together. She smiled, and in the soft glow of the streetlight filtering through our window, I could see the woman I'd fallen in love with 7 years ago. She was still there, underneath the scars and the fear and the weight of what she'd been through. She was still the woman who'd made me laugh at that wedding, who'd said yes before I could finish my proposal, who'd become my partner in every sense of the word. We'd come so close to losing everything. We'd stood at the edge of an abyss of our own making, built from fear and miscommunication and the desperate, misguided desire to protect each other from pain. But we'd stepped back from that edge. We'd chosen honesty over comfort, vulnerability over protection, together over apart. The road ahead was still uncertain. Rebecca's battle with cancer was far from over, and there would be more hard days, more setbacks, more moments where we'd have to dig deep to find the strength to keep going. But we would face those days together, as we always should have. I thought about the divorce papers, still sitting in a folder in my office drawer. I'd kept them as a reminder of how close I'd come to making the biggest mistake of my life. They served as a testament to how easily love could be obscured by fear and misunderstanding, and how important it was to fight for clarity and truth. As Rebecca's breathing deepened into sleep beside me, I made a silent vow. Whatever time we had, whether it was months, years, or decades, I would make every moment count. I would love her fiercely and without reservation. I would be the husband I'd promised to be, the partner she deserved. Because I'd learned the hardest way possible that love isn't just about the easy times when everything is perfect. It's about showing up when things are difficult. It's about choosing each other over and over again, even when, especially when, that choice is hard. I'd almost walked away from the love of my life because I'd been too afraid to ask the right questions. I'd almost let pride and hurt and suspicion destroy the most important relationship I'd ever had. But in the end, by pure chance and grace, I'd been given a second chance. And this time, I wasn't going to waste it. As I drifted off to sleep, holding my wife close, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. Not because our problems were solved or because the future was certain, but because we were facing it together, honestly and openly, the way we always should have been. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect romance or fairy tale endings. Sometimes they're about two imperfect people choosing to be imperfect together, to stumble and fall and get back up, to hurt and heal and grow. Sometimes they're about almost losing everything and finding your way back to what matters most. This was our story. Not perfect, not easy, but ours. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world.